fellow traveler. I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, well, from the spiritual realm, he's sending you this message, and, you know, that's how he contacts you, and that's how he talks to you. And I thought, that sounds familiar, because, of course, Scientology went into all of that stuff through their implant stations and that kind of stuff, which is basically an implant station is their version of hell. So anyway, so I thought, well, this sounds interesting. So he shows me this book of John Rogers and Michael's son. And, of course, Michael's son interests me more than John Rogers does because he's a musician. So he tells us about this party at Lee Taylor Young's house. So we go there that night. That's me, Don, Eddie, and Fritz, two other fellow musicians that I'd got into Scientology and done all this auditing and stuff. Fritz later on joined the Sea Org, and what that is that's kind of like becoming a monk for Scientology, and he actually got to go physically work with L. Ron Hubbard, and later on, a couple months later, he gave me the whole scoop of all that interesting stuff. And I remember we were sitting in his car, or in his dad's, somebody's car, and I was telling him about all these little entities that I seen that was around him, kind of watching him, and he was like freaking out. I didn't know at that time. He felt like he had to escape Scientology for some strange reason. I never did know the whole story behind that, why he got out of the church or anything, but I did see these entities around him and kind of pointed it out to him. But anyway, again, like I said, I had this thing that I had to get typed out with the Church of Scientology. And so now I was basically, it was about a month somewhere in that bracket. I'd got this roommate, Wendy, and she was in the movement of spiritual inner awareness. As I said, she was a good-looking woman that I kind of, you might say, used to get me a place to live. And I really liked her, though. She was a nice woman. Her name was Wendy Spratt, and she worked at Baraka, which is the healing center for John Rogers, their organization. And so I decided, well, Lord, I'm going to put this back in your hands. I said, here's what I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to call Wendy up, and I know that she's a secretary at Baraka, and I'm going to ask her to type this thing up for me. If she'll type it up for me, then I know it's meant for me to get it typed up and take it into the church just as they want. But if she don't, I'm going to throw it in a trash can, and I'm not going to go back into the Church of Scientology basically anymore. So that was my deal. So I called her up and said, Wendy, I want you to type this thing. And she immediately says, I don't know how to type. She says, I'm just a receptionist over here. I said, oh, I thought you was the secretary and blah, blah, blah. I'll see you tonight when you get off. So I threw the thing away and never went back in there. So I got into full-fledged now into the movement of spiritual inner awareness because I thought, well, at least he's talking to the Lord Jesus Christ, and I felt at least I could go to regular churches and not feel like I'm, treasonous or some kind of thing like Scientology wanted to make me feel because I did it. And again, I don't believe L. Ron Hubbard was into any of that stuff. I think that, as I have mentioned before, all organizations have their bad apples. I don't care what kind of organization it is. So anyway, I go to this big seminar thing that John Roger has, and it's on prosperity. And he comes in with, all the boys, Edgar, Victor, and Russ Bishop, and all these, Russ Bishop has all these $100 bills all stuck out at him because the thing was about prosperity. Well, Wendy tells me, now don't hesitate to get up and talk. If you want to say something, you just raise your hand and get up and spill it out because they like you to do that. So I says, okay, great. So they got up and did their intro and all this good stuff, and finally says, is there anybody got any questions or want to share? And there had to be 1,000 people at that place, and this was at the Ambassador Hotel, the same place where that Robert Kennedy got assassinated at, and it had that club in there that Ricky Nelson played at, the La Bamba or something like that, the Coco Club or some kind of deal. But anyway, I immediately shot my hand up, and I got up, and he says, okay, they give me the microphone. I says, I just wanted to find out why my brother is able to Jew people down and I'm not. I mean, I honestly meant it. I had no idea what the word Jew meant. I'd never met a Jewish person, did not know what the word meant. I had no idea what the word meant. I was being totally open and honest. Oh, man, everybody in that place looked at me. You would have thought that I'd done crucified somebody. He says, what? I says, well, my brother, when we go into the pawn shop, I says, and to pawn something, I says, or buy something, I says, he's able to, to Jew the guy down, I says, so we can get it. And, everybody looked at me and started shaking their heads, and they just, I did not know what I was saying. I didn't know what was wrong. So he says, who brought you here? And I pointed to the guy that was next to me. I says, he did. And, of course, he was embarrassed to the max. He stood up and he says, what nationality are you? They asked this guy. He says, well, I'm Jewish. And I still did not know, what it was. He says, we'll talk to you later, basically. And I thought, I did not know, that was a bad word. Or at least that's what they thought it was. So anyway, that's when later on I met Peter McWilliams, who's a famous writer and has had several #1 bestsellers and stuff. And we did a little, one of the little processes together, and he kind of broke it down to me that the word Jew means, it's a bad word. It means people that have been oppressed, and he basically gave me the scoop of what it really meant. And, so I, needless to say, tried not to use that particular word anymore. But I didn't let that deter me. I thought, well, I didn't know, and they certainly didn't know that my lack of education, maybe they thought I was a doctor. They don't know what I was. So anyway, I stayed in the movement and basically was involved around, going having all these pictures at this beautiful mansion that they had called Piranha, and got all these pictures, me and Don, of, of us playing different scenes in the music and all this. I mean, all the people were wonderful. I mean, everybody in the movement that I met was all wonderful, and I got to admit, I met several women, and I want to get this straight. Not that I think that women are nothing but sex objects, but I mean, when you basically are what I guess I was, a sex, what they call a sex addict, because I mean, basically, I had to have sex. It seemed like every day, one way or another. And I guess there's a lot of women that are in the same category, and besides that, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it at that particular stage of the game. So, needless to say, everything went pretty well smooth, and that was all during, 1978, 79, 80. Then came in what they called insight training seminars, which were expansion training seminars, and basically, everything went pretty much smooth around all that particular situation. I never did do no more drugs. I hardly came back to Indianapolis, not very often. I actually got a job working in a filling station out there. I really liked Wendy. I got a job working in a place that was a U-Haul place. I really tried to do right. And everything seemed to be going well, but the music still just was not clicking on for me. I couldn't figure it out, Still, the music, and of course, Don was telling me the whole time, well, this John Rogers is a bunch of crap, and of course, he stayed in Scientology. It's a bunch of crap, it's this, it's that, and, you're, this, and you're that, and so needless to say, we slowly parted companies, and he actually finally came back to Indianapolis, and I stayed out to L.A. again by myself for a while with Wendy. Now, one unfortunate thing that happened with Wendy was I did get her pregnant, which I didn't know that I could, because I thought with that drug overdose that I did that time that one of the doctors told me that I probably wouldn't be able to have kids, so I just assumed that was the truth. So I can say I'm personally responsible for her having to get an abortion. But back in them days, again, I mean, it's the woman's choice. I mean, I admit I paid for it, and I really don't know. I mean, to a degree, it is murder, but I figure the Lord's forgiven me by now for that. So anyway, everything pretty much went smooth. And then after I did the inside, I thought, well, I'm going to go back to Indianapolis again, and I'm going to just show them how great I am. I mean, I've really expanded out. I'm really expanded out. So I come back to Indianapolis, and of course, it's the same old game. Get a job with Verge, start doing the siding and everything. I immediately, of course, connect back up with Don. At this particular stage of the game, they got a little bit of a Scientology game going there, but I really have nothing to do with it. I think I went to one or two little meetings just to, please him. So, but anyway, I get us a job in a band. I get us a little place to play at, the old Keystone Bar and everything, and still it's like right and left with these women, So I'm sitting in a Bob Evans restaurant, and basically this good-looking waitress is there, so I thought, well, I'll just leave her a note with my phone number on it, because she's, pretty busy. So, and it's been a successful operation that's worked for me before, so I leave my name and phone number. Hey, you're good-looking, give me a call, and left it there. Well, needless to say, the waitress never got it. The bus girl did. And the bus girl happened to be a 15-year-old girl by the name of Lynette. And at this particular stage of the game, I was 25 years old. So when she called and gave me, oh, I got your note, and yeah, I'd like to go out and, meet me over there. I get off at work at so-and-so time. And when I pulled up, of course, I was like, horrified, but satisfied at the same time because I just couldn't believe it wasn't the waitress. But you know, I never even really had noticed her as a bus girl, but she was very, very, very cute. So I thought, well, okay. I didn't really even ask her her age. I actually took her to a bar. The very first date, I actually took her to a bar that we were playing at and had drinks with Don and his girlfriend Mary Ann at that time. And you know, I had no idea what her age was until I totally fell for her, and then she broke it down to me, and you know, and I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? She said, oh, my mom don't care, my mom don't care, and blah blah blah, and my dad. And when I got to talking to her, come to find out, her stepdad, of all things, happened to be my second cousin. And of course, later on, I found out he was basically like all the other Harrises. Give you a quick rundown. As I said, you know my dad's situation, but now my grandfather, which was my dad's dad, I'd found out later that he was in prison for raping his own daughter and getting her pregnant. So obviously, you know, this has stemmed back a few different generations, because I come to find out Al was the same way. And he was a woman beater and a controller, and he was just like Verge, a drinker, and there was musicians on his side of the family, and you know, it was almost the same story. So needless to say, he had totally terrified Lynette and abused her and who knows what all to her, which, you know, she told me several things, but I'll never state what they are. Let's just say he was an evil fucking bastard. So one thing led to another. When she turned 16, we got married. So basically, we got married and moved to Texas. I decided at that stage of the game, somehow I got a newspaper and seen an ad for somebody that won siding applicators. I was looking at Phoenix, but it wound up it was in El Paso, Texas. So I talked to the guy. Everything sounded cool. Of course, I'm used to driving back and forth, you know, at the drop of a hat to LA anyway. So it's like, well, we'll drive out there and check everything out. And so we drive out there, and sure enough, it turns out to be a good job. You know, we immediately right into a nice apartment. It's what I would label as a very fun time for me. You know, it's, you know, everybody has these sections in their life that they probably wish they could live again, or that they'd never changed. And basically that first 6 or 8 months, she wound up getting pregnant and all this good stuff. All was, the siding was good. There was no pot. No, I mean, everything was really gelling for us and everything. I'd met a couple other musicians. Everything was basically gelling pretty good. So Nicole was finally born out there in El Paso, and everything, and basically everything went pretty good, except for wound up that the guy that I finally worked for turned out to be an alcoholic. I had to wind up going and working with somebody else, and I finally wound up getting my brother Bob to come out there and work, and Don come out there and worked, and Randy, a good lifetime friend, come out there and worked, and my cousin Leon, and my dad. I even got Verge to come out there, and my stepmom to come out there, and well, needless to say, over about a 2 or 3 year period at that time, finally the whole thing, I wound up moving to another little town, and the Lord always took care of me, even when I got totally fired and didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. I mean, something always happened. I mean, I remember once, this was when Lynette was back in Indianapolis with Nicole, showing her off. The truck totally died at the side of the road. I just left El Paso, left my brother Bob, and the truck died at the side of the road and everything, and I just says, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to give it over to the Lord here. So literally, I slept in the truck that night, hitchhiked back to Bob's the next morning. He come and checked it out. He knew a little bit about mechanical things, and it just wouldn't turn. It just was froze. So we went to a couple of places, and each repair place says, the motor's locked up. That's the motor. The motor's locked up. So we go to the very last place. Totally gave up, and I thought, man, I cannot be without a truck, be without a vehicle, and our apartment now is in Odessa, you know, and Lynette's expecting me to meet her in Dallas to pick her up at the airport, and it's like I'm like having this frenzy, and I shouldn't even have been all the way over there in the first place, you know, and everything, and I've done spent all my money and stuff over there, actually, you know, picking up girls and women and that kind of stuff, so doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. So anyway, so it's like, oh no, what am I going to do? So the very last guy that we talked to, matter of fact, we weren't even in there really talking to the guy about, we were talking to a guy about, do you know anybody that's got a tow truck that can come and tow it to the junkyard, and at least I can junk it. And as we're talking to this guy, he says, well, what's wrong with it? And Bob explains to him what it is. He said, well, 3 other mechanics said the motor's locked up. And the guy said, that ain't the motor. And he said, I'll tell you exactly what it is. He says, it's this little thing right here. He says, it's $3.20. And I literally remember saying, Bob, I only got $5. If I spend that on that, I'm going to really be broke. But it was like, okay, what am I going to do? I thought, well, okay. So I bought the little part, and sure enough, the truck started right up. And, of course, I drove it for a good long time after that, at least a couple years after that. But me and Lynette, while we were out west, we had a super good time. Unfortunately, as she got a little older, her drinking problem definitely got much more out of hand. So I decided, well, I might as well start smoking pot because, if she's going to drink, I got to do something. And I certainly do not want to drink because I just, after the Verge scene and all that. So then we started, I decided just to start smoking pot again. So we got along good for a long time until finally I realized, look, Nicole is not going to have any kind of a chance if I'm smoking pot and can't make no money, and she's not going to be able to have a very nice life if I spend all my money on pot. So I decided, okay, that was it, and I stopped smoking pot again. And then, up to that point, we'd moved back to Indianapolis. I fell and broke my wrist, and so I luckily pulled in my own insurance check on that particular thing, and for like 2 years I got $180 a week, and we lived off of that. Basically, I hardly worked, and then that's how I learned how to get into the sales into the game and started selling siding and stuff while I was getting this insurance check and everything. And basically, pretty much everything, was your typical what you would expect with someone who has a drinking problem, who's been abused as a child. I'm referring to Lynette. And finally, I just finally told her, look, I lived with a drunk when I was a little kid, and I'm certainly not going to live with one now. So basically, after catching her cheating with the guy next door, I decided, even though I was very guilty of the same thing, so I ain't knocking her for nothing that I certainly didn't do many times, we decided to just get a divorce. So that's exactly what we did, and it was basically a good, peaceful divorce. Matter of fact, she didn't even show up. I gave her a new car at this time. I was working for Bidford Construction, old Jim Stewart, and everything was going good. I gave her a new car. I paid her rent on her apartment and everything else, hoping that maybe if I was out of the picture, she had stopped drinking or slowed down, but it actually got worse. And one major incident that actually happened with us was I decided in the middle of the afternoon, it was like 90 degrees outside. And my dad lived right around the corner from them in an apartment complex, and I was over there, so I thought, well, I'll just drive over by. And this jealousy thing was beginning to get a hold of me, so I think I'll just drive over by and see if she's there. So I drive over by, and there's Nicole outside on her little bike. She's like about 5 or 6 years old. I'm not real sure of the age. And she's like out there, and I'm watching her, and I keep thinking, well, I keep waiting and waiting. I'm actually just waiting to see when Lynette's going to come down and get her. I wait and wait and wait, and it's like a half hour. Nothing. Then I see Nicole go up and go to the next door neighbor's house, and she comes, back down. I can hear she's beating on the door, and she comes back down, gets back on her bike and rides. Well, now it comes to be at least about an hour, and it's like 90 degrees outside. I'm thinking, well, she's knocking on the door trying to use the restroom or something. So finally I said, that's it. So I pull on up there. I put Nicole in the car, and I take her drive right over, and I take her to my dad's house and drop her off, which, of course, with his particular problem and Larry's problem, but I didn't know what else to do. It was like, one of them binds you're in, but I knew I could not take Nicole because that wouldn't look too cool. So anyway, I took her over there, and we sat and waited and waited and waited. What I was really waiting for was for Lynette to call over there to think that obviously, Nicole must be over there, that I must have picked her up. Finally, 4 hours later, they call, and it's a lady lieutenant on the state police. Is Lonnie Harris there? I get on the phone. Yeah, this is he. Do you have your daughter? And I says, well, yeah, I do. She says, you kidnapped your daughter, something to that. I says, no, I didn't kidnap my daughter. I says, I've had my daughter sitting over here at my parents' house for, and I says, approximately 4 hours. I said that, and I waited outside, that she was out in the sun for over an hour, and my ex-wife never did come down and check on her. And personally, I didn't want her to stand out in the heat all day long while she's upstairs banging the next door neighbor. So I just told her how it was. So she says, okay, let me talk to your mom. So Larry got on the phone. She asked her how long she been over there, and she told her, says, well, she's been over here for, 4 hours, and well, needless to say, uh, you know, uh, they never pressed no charges because they realized that Lynette was the one that was the neglected one. Another time, this is how Nicole wound up living with me for about 2 years, this was like a day before Christmas. The babysitter finally calls me up, you're going to have to come and get your daughter. I says, well, what's the problem? She says, she's been over here for 3 days. I said, what? She says, Lynette brought her over here 3 days ago and said she was only going down to the grocery store and that she would be right back. And it's been 3 days and I just can't keep her over Christmas. And I said, I'll be right over there. So I shoot right over there, and I call Lynette's mom, and she tells Lynette's mom the whole thing. And I said, I'm going to keep Nicole. That's all there is to it. I've had enough. So needless to say, Lynette never came around that Christmas or anything. And finally, through negotiating with her mom, she realized she had a bad drinking problem. And Nicole wound up living with me for, like I said, approximately about 2 years. And then Lynette finally, through losing her apartment and everything else, we finally let her move back in with us. And then I seen that, things seemed to be pretty good, even though, again, this was at Christmas time. Probably 2 years later, Lynette goes into a freak out period, and she tears up everything in the house, tears the Christmas tree down. Of course, Nicole's just standing there watching the whole thing. It was the typical teared everything up in the house and everything, and then calls her mom up. Of course, I'm not living there now. I come over there and see the whole thing, and her mom's, and that's when she tells her mom that Al had been molesting her, and why didn't she ever stand behind her, and why did she let him, and she knew he was doing all this, and I might say that was probably a very long night in my life, and I'm sure a long night in Nicole's life. So anyway, I took her under my wing, and basically, everything finally panned out, and all this good stuff. And after her getting arrested a couple of times for drinking and driving and going to jail and various things like that, she finally got somewhat of a hold on her drinking problem. And at least, hopefully, I think now she's got it tapered down to just 1 day a week, and I don't think she gets totally sloppy drunk. Now, I will have to say that part of her drinking problem is definitely my fault, because back when we lived in Texas and stuff, like I said, so I could sit around and smoke pot all day long with my music buddies and everything, then I basically would buy her when she was like 18 and 19 and 20 and 24. She can go into a bar. I bought her all the liquor that she wanted, so I can't blame nobody but myself on that situation. And but all in all, we had a pretty good time. I mean, all in all, the money was good. Everything was pretty good. And all in all, like I said, everything was pretty fine. And that really takes us up to, realistically, about 1987. Okay, in 1987, no, that's right, it's 1986. That's when I thought everything was fine, everything was going peachy. I got myself credit cards and, the Visa card from this bank and the Visa card from that bank. I had 2 brand new spanking vehicles, myself plus a new vehicle for Lynette. I mean, I was making money over fist, and I had this good tax guy that, old Mark Makovics, that Don lined me up with. Oh, good old Mark. He said, oh, you'll never have to pay no taxes. You pay me $700 or $800 a year, and I'll make sure you just get every receipt that you can always get. When you're in a restaurant, always get 2 or 3 receipts. If you're at a gas station, he says, pick up 2 or 3 of them. He said, just always get as many receipts as you can. So for like 3 years, this was from like 84, 85, and 86, I used this guy. Oh, talk about a disaster. I mean, talk again, when you get around these people that are demonic possessed or only think of theirself, boy, look out. And boy, did I have no idea whatsoever what I was about to encounter. One day, all of a sudden, in the old mailbox, there's the official letter from our good old folks at the IRS. Lon, we want you to come on down. We got a couple questions for you. Now, one other thing that happened at this particular time, before I get into the tax story, is that back when I was about 15 or 16 years old, me and my brother Rick had a couple of girlfriends that lived in Brownsburg. And we go down and hump every now and then. And one of them, unfortunately, and I think it was in 1984, somewhere in that bracket, of course, she had got pregnant by Rick and had his kid. I really don't quite remember her name, but this guy by the name of Stephen Judy, a guy who was let out of jail on bond or something, should have never been back out on the street. I believe he even told people that if he got out, he was going to do something even worse. He was just, again, just demonic possessed and should have never been let out. He was hitchhiking down the highway, I guess, and this ex-girlfriend of Rick's picks him up hitchhiking, and he winds up, her name was Terry, I believe. He winds up not only killing her, raping her and killing her, but she has 2 kids, I believe, and it might even been 3, one of them being one of Rick's kids. And he just takes and throws all 3 of them, or both of them, in the river, kills her kids, and kills her. I mean, what a horrible scene that must have been for her, to watch her kids actually drowned in front of her, and then this guy rape her and murder her. And this guy, I mean, he should have never been out on the street. I remember there was one of them deals that he just should have never been released. And of course, they finally wound up executing the guy, but unfortunately, it's just too bad that these innocent little kids had to die, and this woman because of him. But and that was happening at about the same time. I believe that was in 1986 when he had got when they had executed him. But anyway, so I got the letter. So I called old Mark down there at the tax place. Oh, don't worry about it. He says, don't worry about it. It's just routine. He says, I'm a CPA. He says, everything. He says, don't even worry about it. I says, well, will you go down there with me? Oh, no, I can't go down there with you. He says, I said, well, I've paid you all this money. He says, yeah, but my name ain't on there, is it? I says, well, no. He says, well, I can't go down there with you. He says, they just want you. Well, again, being ignorant, as far as with my lack of education, I thought, well, maybe the guy's right. Hey, I don't know. So I go down there. And they say, well, you got this deduction, you got this, you got all these, where's all your proof? So I take all these receipts and everything that this yahoo told me to save, and I got them all in a big box, and it's kind of like, later on when you see, Fred Stanford and his deal down at the tax office. They're just all in boxes. And the guy looks at me, he says, I can't take none of that stuff. I says, well, these are all my receipts in there. He says, I want your files. He says, I want how everything's been filed down. I can't take none of that stuff. I said, well, this is the stuff. He says, I'm not taking any of that stuff. So one thing leads to another. Come to find out, that wasn't even what he really even wanted. I had read the paper wrong. What he had actually wanted was he wanted my taxes from 1983. And I said, 1983? I said, well, I done threw all that stuff away. He says, well, you're not supposed to throw that stuff away. He says, you're supposed to keep that stuff for 5 years or 7 years. I says, well, how am I supposed to know that? I says, I thought once you filed your taxes, that was it. I threw the stuff away. And that was, of course, the very first year that I'd ever filed my taxes, because that was the year Nicole was born. And I thought, well, I got to have, I got to be a regular person. I got to have Social Security, and I got to, in case something happens to me, she's got to be able to be taken care of. So I was trying to do the right thing. Well, this guy that I work for, this Mark Kapansky, there in New Mexico, he was a big crook. What he would do would be, like, say on Monday morning, all the jobs were out of town. Well, I was living in this little dinky town, and all of his jobs were way out of town where I'd have to stay in a hotel. So Monday morning, he would give me a check for, let's just say, $400. And that would be for the hotel room and for my food and for my gas and all that stuff. Okay? So then what he would do is I would take that check, go down to the bank and cash it, and then I'd go do the job. Well, that Friday, when I would come in, he would pay me the job, and if the job was like $900, he would give me a check for $900, and then he would say, now here's another check for my $400 back that I gave you, so I get my own money, he would say, back, and I would never think nothing about it. So what he was doing was he was giving me actually $800 a week. That was actually $400 was for expenses that he was probably taking off on his own taxes, and then $400 showing I was paying it back to him. Well, needless to say, he was showing like I was almost making $2,000 a week with him. And then, of course, I had a helper, and I threw all the stuff away where I paid this guy all the hourly wages because I didn't know I had to keep all that stuff. But needless to say, I think to make a long story short, it showed that in 1983 I had made something like $40,000 or $50,000. I said, man, that's just totally downright ridiculous. I said, there ain't no way in the world I made that kind. I said, you want to tell me how I could have made that kind of money and got my truck repossessed and got thrown out of my house? I says, there's no way that I made that kind of money. I said, if I did, how much do I owe you? So it was like some ridiculous astronomical amount. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like, $40,000 or something with taxes and penalties. And I mean, it was just something that I just boggled my mind. I said, this can't be right and everything. I said, there's no way any of this stuff can be right. So he says, well, it is. He says, that's how much you owe us. I says, that guy's a crook. I said, I told him, gave him the basic run. He said, well, but you ain't got no records. He says, you ain't got nothing. So he says, I don't know nothing. I said, the guy did not pay me that much money. I says, even when he bought me a truck, I said, he gave me $2,000 check to buy the truck, made out to me. I went down, cashed it, and bought the truck. I says, and then he would pay me, and then I would have to turn around, and somehow he'd wind up doing another kind of check deal where he got his money back. I says, I said, he rooked me. I says, I don't know how he did it, but I said, somehow the guy rooked me. I know darn good. Well, come to find out a year later, they audited my dad, who also worked for the same guy. He did the same thing to him, showed that he'd paid him $60-something thousand, and my dad had his receipts and stuff, and he had only actually paid him $20-something thousand. Of course, we told the IRS, and they probably never gave a heck about the guy, I don't know whatever happened to the guy, but I know the guy was a downright thief. So, I mean, hopefully the IRS got him and he's in jail, because that's where a guy like that should be. So anyway, the guy says, well, because you're off on this particular year, he says, I want you to bring in this year, and this year, and this year. So I had to take in the 84, 85, in 86. He says, I want to see all your records. And that's when I, of course, took all these receipts in and all this good stuff. And he basically laughed me out of the office. But I had kind of an interesting scene in the place. He says, well, I can't take none of them receipts. And, and he says, well, I'll give you some gas allowance, and I'll give you some. And we're like there for hours. And so finally he says, okay, I've got it all figured out here. And he says, I'll go back and find out how much you owe. So he goes back in this another room. We're like in this big, giant office with all these people. And all of a sudden I could hear this machine back there, ticker tape type of machine that's doing all this typing, and I mean, it's just going crazy. And I'm like, wow, what is all that stuff, So finally he comes back, and he has this thing, it's as thick as a book. I says, well, okay, how much do I owe you? And he kind of flops the whole thing out, and it was like some ridiculous amount of like $60,000. I says, man, there ain't no way in the world I can pay you that or owe that kind of money. I says, and at that point I just kind of pushed my chair back, and I says, well, I can see I'm going to have to get myself an attorney. He said, what? I says, well, I guess I'm going to have to get myself an attorney. And it was like you could hear a pin drop in that place. It's like, you used the wrong word, attorney. He says, I could find more things. He says, matter of fact, he says, I don't have to take any of these receipts. I don't have to give you no allowance. I don't have to give you nothing, because your records are totally blah, blah, blah. So he says, you just go ahead and get yourself an attorney. He says, and matter of fact, he says, while you're getting yourself an attorney, he says, I can take for the next 5 years, he says, and I can audit you every year. I can do whatever I want on your taxes. He says, so you get an attorney all you want. So I thought, no, I said, well, then what am I supposed to do? He says, well, write us a check. I said, there's no way I can pay that. So they wind up making some kind of payment arrangements. And so I try it for a while, because the money is pretty good. Well, needless to say, to make a long story short, I wind up losing both of my cars. Lynette winds up losing her car. Wind up basically, of course the credit cards are gone. Basically, they put all these liens on my on my credit report, and they're still there to this day. They're still there. It's 10 years later, and they're still on there. I got, I think, like 38 tax liens. I've never to this day ever been able to pay any of them. I've actually filed bankruptcy twice because of it. I mean, I remember talking to the federal judge and said, how in the world are people supposed to know this kind of stuff? I mean, they don't teach you nothing in school about taxes. They don't even teach you how to file taxes. I mean, where in the world are people supposed to know all this kind of lingo, let alone all these giant words that you guys talk about? So for a long time, I paid them like $700 a month every month, and then finally the pressure got so great, and Bidford finally fell apart, and I basically was out on a shoestring and wound up just not paying them a cent. And I think they threw the thing out of bankruptcy. I have no idea what happened, but I've since have been, of course, contacted with them a couple different times. This was like back in now we're getting up until like about 1989. And, I tried to make payments. Like I said, I went to tax court, bankruptcy court 2 or 3 times. And I gave it my best shot. Like I said, they totally rumped my credit. There was no way I could start my own business, so there was no way I could ever make any kind of decent money. So in comes 1989. I decide, well, I'll try to start selling some jobs on the side, blah, 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 because like I said, the Bidford thing fell apart because he got into listening to the wrong voice himself, and he knows that himself now. He even though I tried to tell him what was going on, he fully realizes now these days that I was 100% right, and it cost him everything. That poor guy worked for 30 years. Because I'll tell you, friends, when somebody evil comes around with a big smile on their face, I mean, and you all of a sudden see your life slowly changing and slowly dropping and going downhill, you better take a look at all your friends. You better take a look at who you're hanging out with, because I guarantee you that if things are going downhill for you, especially if they've been going pretty much smooth or ordinary or at a steady pace ahead, and all of a sudden you start backtracking, you better look who new came into your environment. I mean, that's why it's so important for kids. I mean, man, the kids, they have no idea the person that they hang out with, they're going to be like that person. And if this person happens to be a drinker or a sex addict, or if this person hates their parents and or whatever their particular problems are, it's going to reflect on your child. Your child may be a perfectly normal kid. If there is such a thing, your child may be just great, get good grades in school and everything's just fine and dandy, but maybe for some reason, because maybe say she's just a little heavy set, she can't get a boyfriend, so she starts hanging out with somebody that they're able to get boyfriends for some strange reason. And maybe that strange reason is because they go to bed with everybody around the block. Well, guess what your daughter's going to wind up doing? She's going to be just like her, and then she's going to wind up with some kind of AIDS or pregnant, or it's all in education. If kids really knew what really goes on, it's like old Nancy Reagan used to say, just say no. Well, now kids aren't stupid. You think they're not sitting there saying, oh, just say no. It's okay for you guys to smoke your cigarettes and smoke yourself to death. It's okay for you guys to drink all your liquor and your alcohol and your wine and all this good stuff. Well, why don't you guys say no? It's okay for you guys to, certain people to rip off the American publics and get away with it. I mean, you think kids don't see this kind of stuff and they're supposed to just say no and not have fun? They're supposed to be like good little nuns and good little monks. Well, no, they're going to look at you and you're telling them to say no, and you're doing something that's just as bad, if not worse. I mean, how can they have any kind of respect for you? I mean, come on, give kids a break. They're not as dumb as you think they are. But kids, I'm telling you, the person you hang out with, your best friend, your best buddy, you might ask yourself, are you willing to go to the grave for that person? Because you may be doing it. I mean, are you willing to be, your life totally be ruined? I mean, ask the 500,000 teenagers every year that get pregnant that if they really knew about condoms, if they really knew about sex, if they really knew about that it's just a biological thing that kids, once they get a certain age, they have this physical attraction for each other. And the more people say, no, you can't do it, it's like putting a jar of candy in front of them saying, no, there's the candy, but you can't have none. Now, we can have some, or we can have all we want. It's okay for us to go out. I mean, I know this 14-year-old girl right now that her mom, tells her, obviously, no, you can't have nothing to do with sex or anything else, but yet she dates and has a married man over to her house every night, and then she goes to church. I mean, not to say she ain't seeking help, but how in the world does she expect her daughter to respect her or think that's not the normal thing? I mean, and if her daughter winds up getting pregnant, then she's going to wonder, why me, and not even taking a look at herself. I mean, and that's just constantly all over the place. And I ought to know, because if there's one thing that I happen to be a real expert on, it is definitely sex. Because as I said, and as you've heard, I mean, from the time I've been knee-high to a grasshopper, I've been involved in sex. And yes, I can honestly say I probably am a sex addict. I can honestly say that I probably am a drug addict, even though at this time I'm not involved in either one of them particular situations. But I know that if the scene is right, I can turn the game on or turn it off just as quick as I can. Luckily, with some of the other trainings that I've done, I've learned how these things get triggered on, how they turn on, and how to turn them off. And I do believe that all people have these two different sides, like L. Ron Hubbard said, but it's like which side is going to be totally in control is a whole different story. I know there's ways that people can totally clean their act up, get off of drugs. I don't care what kind of drugs you're on. I don't care what your situation is. I mean, if you're breathing, there's hope for you. one way or another. If you're breathing, there's hope for you. You say, well, Lon, yeah, but I've been doing alcohol for 52 years and I'm, my, things all swelled up and this and that. Well, yeah, but, Stephen Hawking proved, this famous scientist, that basically nothing ever dies. I mean, in quantum mechanics, it's a proven theory now that nothing actually dies. So whether you want to believe in heaven or hell, science has proved that nothing even dies. Even these black holes that they thought that once things suck into it, that's the end of the story. Well, guess what? Quantum mechanics has now proved that once, no matter what the mass is that goes inside a black hole, it finally converts back out and comes back out in what? Guess what? A light particle. I mean, imagine that. It comes right back out as a light particle. No matter, it may go in the deepest mass and be the darkest, heaviest thing under the sun, and once it goes into that black circle, that black hole, you think that's all there is. So, no, it comes back out, a light. A teensy-weensy, little-bitty light. So, I mean, science has proven it. But the thing is there's hope for everybody. There's hope for everything. There's hope for this nation. Man, we don't have to have these power mongols running everything. We don't have to have these people that have got our education system so knocked out of shape that, I mean, you can't even pray in school. You can't, I mean, think about it, folks. I mean, since things have changed, I mean, take a really good look at it. Since they've taken prayer and some of this other stuff out of school, these people that don't want you to do that, and of course, why? Because once you start figuring out and being on the light side, you might start figuring out what side that they're on. So they don't want you to pray. They don't want you to have this ammunition when you're a little kid, so you know what's going on. They don't want you to say the Pledge of Allegiance and some of these things that has made our nation what it is. Because they're saying, well, it says the church and state should be separated. Well, that's fine. What do they want to do? Totally ruin the country? I mean, can't people say, well, we made a mistake. We're wrong. Abortion may not be right. Or, hey, we made a mistake. Maybe children, maybe they ought to have the option. Have you ever thought about that? Maybe they can say, okay, at 10 o'clock every day, we're going to have prayer. People that want to do praying, show up in room number 822. People that don't want to show up for prayer, you can go to gym, or you can go have a snack. You can go have, you can go read the Atheist Handbook for how to become a millionaire. How about letting the kids have a little bit of a choice? It's okay if somebody at 14 years old takes a handgun and blows another teenager away. Oh, we're right. Let's try them as an adult. They're an adult. They did it. Let's get them. Oh, but they can't make a decision about whether they want to pray in school, or they can't make a decision about whether, if they decide they want to have sex, they want to have the ability to have a condom. Well, if that was your 14-year-old daughter, I think you would want her to have that. Well, no, my daughter would never do nothing like that because I brought her up with an iron fist and I told her this and that. Well, that's hogwash. I mean, that's hogwash. It's quite obvious that out of the 500,000 a year pregnancies, teen pregnancies there are, I'm sure quite a few of them, their parents thought they brought their kids up with the old iron fist, or they brought their kids up right and their kids would never do blah, blah, blah. Again, they probably did, but if their kids hang out with somebody who's isn't of the right thinking, or somebody who's, out to prove a point one way or another, I mean, there's more dead kids in the old graveyard right now because they run around with the wrong kid. I mean, go ask them. I mean, they'll gladly tell you, look, I wish I hadn't went out with this guy. I wish I had nothing to do with this particular guy. Probably the most important thing that we do, folks, is who we hang out with. That is probably the most important thing, is who you actually hang out with, because that person is a direct reflection of who you are. That's the whole idea of going to church. It ain't going to church so you can make that church bigger and richer, and so the minister can live in a big mansion and everybody can say, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. No, it was because the Lord knew that if you hang around with people with light minds, the same kind of mind, that it gives you strength, that when you're out there in the field and the negative force comes your way, you still got all that strength. You can start thinking of that church. I mean, it's like right now, if you start thinking, of a good time, you start thinking of the church that you go to, or you start thinking of the family reunion you had, or you can start bringing all that good time with you, and you can actually bring it right into the here and now. So that's what they knew back in them days, that if you could take that with you and you're out there and the devil's on top of you, you just got to start thinking of the church, you got to start thinking of the Lord, and boom, the next thing you know, all them angels are right there with you. With there's one thing the devil don't like, and I can tell you what that is. He don't like the light. He don't like the light. I mean, he does not like the light. I mean, he likes total pitch darkness. And what is pitch darkness? It's ignorance. That's what pitch darkness is. It's ignorance. Nothing more than that, just ignorance. And that's why he don't want you to have this ammunition. That's why he don't want kids to pray in school. That's why he don't want kids to call on the name of God. Well, you say, Lon, there's so many different names. There's all these other different organizations, Allah and all these other blah, 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 blah. How can we say them all? I honestly really don't know. America is basically right now a nation of Christians. So right now they should have maybe, like I said, at 10 o'clock, everybody that wants to go pray to Jesus, that should meet at 10 o'clock. Everybody that don't can go have a hamburger. And then maybe at 2 o'clock, everybody that wants to pray to Allah can go and pray to Allah, and everybody who else don't can go have a hamburger. There is options, folks. There are things called options. You could have just a separate room in a school, in every school, that at any time in between your recess class, you can go there and do your thing. If you want to go there and pray, if you want to go there and say, bow to Ah, or, all these light organizations, that's the whole key. I mean, that is the whole key. But I can tell you, the people you hang out with, you're staking your life on them. It's that simple. I mean, I personally think that the atheists have had their time here in America. I think that they've ran this country long enough. And let's face it, man, look what they've done to us. Look what they have done to our country. I mean, folks, really take a look around. I mean, this country, whether you want to admit it or not, just because maybe your little kingdom looks okay, we're in sorry shape here, folks. I mean, we really are. I mean, it's time to take a look around. I mean, what in the world do you think our kids and grandkids are going to do? I mean, it ain't going to last there. I wondered a long time to find the right song to sing. I wondered